All right, here we are with a good treat on the channel. This is the first full-length, non-short video we're doing. We're going to take a deep dive into creating a custom part for the Gridfinity spice drawer I was organizing. You may have seen that in one of the previous shorts. I wanted something to hold our 4-ounce mason jars, and I couldn't find anything, so I decided to make one. Full disclosure, I have a background in 3D modeling, generally from an entertainment perspective, not from an industrial perspective, but it has been years since I've done any of this. So what you'll see here is me relearning some of those skills, but having a lot of background in the methodologies and what you might want to look for. Also learning a tool for the first time. I have never used Tinkercad before. Spoiler, I don't think I will use Tinkercad again. I was struggling to find very basic things, and you'll see a lot of that in this first video. But I didn't want to go through the trouble of figuring out a Fusion license, figuring out OpenSCAD, or anything like that. I just wanted something where I could make this part, quickly learn the tool, and keep going, honestly. So in future videos, you're probably going to see me using Fusion. Anyway, here we are in Tinkercad for the first time. This first segment is sped up double speed. Like I said, I was fumbling around a lot with these tools. I was Googling in the background, and so we would just be sitting here with a lot of empty space if I didn't do anything about that. But the other two part iterations, those are going to be full speed. So as you've seen so far, I started and imported a base bin. I did some initial measurements, and y'all, I didn't even have calipers yet. So if you wonder if you can make a part or not without any fancy tools, you absolutely can. You'll need something to measure with, but you don't need to be precise. You just need to be in the right ballpark. Anyway, I'd done some rough measurements. I knew the 4-ounce container was roughly 2.5 inches on the bottom. And unfortunately, that means we're going to have to use a 2x2 Gridfinity plate. Now, there are all sorts of things you could do about this, right? You could maybe make it as a 6 wide, right? And get 4 pieces in there. But I wanted a simple one for one. I didn't want to have to deal with how to optimize the part and optimize the space just yet while I was learning and making this part for the first time. So I did start with the 2x2 Gridfinity base model that I found. I'll link them in the description, but spoiler, again, I changed the base plate right here. I did not like that the first one had the magnet holes. I had no need for magnets. I didn't need the extra complexity. So I found a different base online once I realized that I couldn't actually manipulate the vertices of models in Tinkercad. What I wanted to do was just drag down the top set of vertices, make it shorter, but you just can't do that. You've got to cut. So that was one of the hurdles. I think I spent a good 10 minutes trying to figure out how to move the vertices on this thing when that's just not something that Tinkercad allows. So anyway, this very first prototype part, all I'm doing is sort of checking my dimensions. So I've made the cylinder here with some very basic settings. I've lined it up with the base plate. I've inset it so you can have a couple of millimeters of clearance. And I'm going to cut out this shape from the part. This is just to see if it fits, just to see how accurate my measurements were. Again, I didn't have calipers and I just had a regular measuring tape. So I just wanted to set a baseline for myself. Right now, this pause, I am Googling how the heck do you cut a shape into another shape, because I can see in Tinkercad solid and whole, and I can see what each of them do, but I cannot for the life of me figure out how to cut in this shape. It took me an embarrassingly long amount of time to find the correct order of operations here, even after looking it up on Google. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know if I clicked the wrong thing, wasn't thinking about it the right way. Who knows? Once I got the right order of operations, things went a lot smoother, and I used that for the rest of the models here. It's a pretty integral tool into Tinkercad. That's about one of the only ways to manipulate shapes that I was able to find. Anyway, like I said, very much struggling to cut this cylinder out of this base plate. This is awkward, y'all. And remember, this is sped up by 2 times. So I was here for a good long while trying to get this to work. But again, no shame in any of it. If you're learning, you will get there eventually, and then you'll know how to do it, and it won't be a problem for you in the future. I think I've got it this time. I think this is going to be the one. So the trick is you have to set your cut piece to whole, and then you have to select both pieces, and then you have to merge them together. And I think this is it. This is it. Oh, success. All right, we've got the first piece. So straight to printing, and then we're going to check the fit against the container just to make sure things are going right. It fits in there nice and snug. A little bit of wiggle, which is honestly what we want. I don't want there to be one jar that doesn't work for some reason. Anyway, I'm really happy with this fit. It fits on the base plate. It fits the jar. It does exactly what it needs to do, which is awesome. Now, let's move to the second iteration of this part. For this one, I knew I would be printing a lot of them, so I wanted to use as little filament as possible. So that means having this all raised up, even with the infill, would be more than we need. So what I was exploring here was a way to essentially get a wall around the mason jar that would hold it in place and have a lower top of this base. I really wanted this ring shape to work, as you can tell, but the geometry just wasn't there. It bulged out on the sides, and I wanted something flat. So reaching for a brand new cylinder to do this task. The rough plan here, knowing what I learned about Tinkercad's tools, was to create the cylinder that was going to be the thickness of the wall I wanted, and then add another cylinder to it to cut out the first shape, and then cut that shape out of the base plate. And so what would be left would be a wall ringing where the jar would sit. So right now, you can see me struggling with these dimensions a little bit. Honestly, I wish there was just a way you could type in the dimensions instead of having to drag the handle and move it by hand. That was honestly so annoying. If you know Tinkercad better than I do, please let me know if that's possible, because that would be such an amazing thing to have been able to do. So right now I'm checking my dimensions, and I'm making sure that this outer cylinder is going to be bigger than the base plate, because I want to be able to chop off the entire top without issues. So here we are. I've got the hole the right dimensions. I'm going to cut it out of this one, be left with the donut. I'm going to line it to the base plate, and then I'm going to cut it out of the donut. Out of the base plate. So what we're going to end up with is a sliced off base plate, but a wall for the jar to sit in. So let's see what we end up with here. Oh, and look, I made a mistake. I didn't get the dimensions of the interior portion. So now, if I remember right, I undo all of it. I think I undo it, change the dimensions of that inner circle, and go again. Yeah, I tried to scale it, and that was not going to work the way I wanted it to. So I got my dimensions correct this time. 2 millimeters larger than the diameter of the hole I already cut, which is the size that will hold the jar. Now that should be correct and actually give us a wall when we cut these parts together. I honestly should have sketched out what I was trying to do before I did it. That would have saved me a lot of time and headache, but I was just sort of making this up on the fly, just sort of going for it and see what we got. This is looking really good. It's so close to what I want. I'm realizing, though, that the base plate is just a little bit too thin. I was worried with how that was going to hold up coming off of the print plate and just the general stability. So I undid a couple of times, raised it up, and did the cut again. It was at this point I was realizing I could actually save a little bit more filament. I realized we didn't need an entire ring to hold the jar in place. We just sort of needed segments of a ring. So I'm actually going to cut out some material from that wall I made to just, use less filament, be just enough to keep the jar in place. Also, I think it looks a little cooler too. So what we're doing here, we're continuing with these Tinkercad basics of cutting shapes from other shapes, which is what the tool is good at. So I have made some boxes. Honestly, there is no rhyme or reason to the dimension I chose here. I just chose something that looked about right. So I lined it up, I aligned it with the base plate, I duplicated it and rotated it, merged them together, and then cut them out of the base. And so we still have that wall. You can see we have that chamfer that existed on the original cylinder. Looking at this again, I think I just want to have a little bit less on that wall. So we're going to undo a couple steps and make the cross a little bit bigger. But frankly, for a second iteration, I'm really happy with how this turned out. It's got a lot of the features that I want it to have. And honestly, it looks great. I'm really happy with it. So let's get this one to the printer. Let's see if it still fits. Let's see if that holds the jar properly. And we can check our clearances and we can move on to the third and final iteration. So let's get that printed. A fun story, during this print, we actually had a power blip. So I was able to unintentionally check out how you can recover from that. It went great except for that one long string you saw. So remove that, got to going, and everything was awesome. So here's this second iteration. Still fits great, which makes sense. The measurement is the same. I'm noticing that the wall isn't quite as tall as I would like. I think it needs to be taller to fully capture the jar. And I'm checking out the chamfer here. The jar itself is a lot more curved than I have in the wall. It's not a huge deal, but I would like to make them closer if I can. So, final iteration. I'm going to take everything I learned from the previous two and make this part. I decided to start from scratch simply because since Tinkercad isn't parametric, I couldn't go back and redo some of the things I had done previously that I didn't like. So I just started fresh. Here I am getting the cylinder to the correct dimensions. This time I'm correcting a mistake from last time, which is not having enough sides and not having enough bevel and segments on the bevel. I'm going to fix that this time just to get a nicer, more clean print with a smoother circle. The first one, I didn't care too much because I was testing out the piece. This one, I want to be as good as possible. So I upped the sides, up the segments, and now I'm finding about the right bevel to match up with the jar. What you don't see is the worst way to do this, but I was actually holding the jar up to the screen to see if it matched the bevel because I had no good way to measure it myself. And it comes close enough. So from here, we're going to make our first cut into the base plate. We're going to leave a couple of millimeters. I think I do about 2 millimeters above where the bottom of the base plate is to try and make these segments sort of even. So if I remember right, that's about 2 millimeters more of base plate, about 4 millimeters of wall or something like that. Point is, I wanted to make the wall holding the jar a little bit taller, and I wanted to make the base plate as thin as possible that would still hold up and still maintain its structure. We actually had a problem with one of them when I took it off the build plate. I broke it. So this is now roughly aligned with the bottom of the grid and the start of the base plate interior. So now I'm going to move it up again. What did I do? Oh, only 2. Okay, yeah, 2. So we've got 2 millimeters above the bottom of the base plate. And then again, that leaves that 4, maybe even 6 millimeters of wall for the actual holding of the jar. So I'm going to do one more check on the chamfer of this cylinder. I'm honestly not quite sure why I spent so much time on this part, especially when it doesn't really make a difference in holding the shape. I guess I wanted it to look nice or something like that. I'm probably also holding the jar up to the screen again just to see if these values match. I did it once. I'm sure I did it a second time. And again, this is just sort of checking those values, double and triple checking what the chamfer looks like. Because frankly, on this cylinder, it doesn't really look the way I would expect it to. It's not quite a smooth round on the bottom. So I was just trying to find sort of that magic value that I thought would make the best hold for that jar. And I think we're just about there. Now that I have that chamfer sorted out, I'm going to make sure there's enough space And these dimensions are where I want them. So I think I'm going to sort of reset this down to 0 and then move it back up to get where I want, since we're doing millimeter increments in Tinkercad. I know you can change that, but it makes it really easy to keep it for now. So I think I'm going to go, again, about 2 up. Yep, 2 up from the bottom of that. And then the rest will become space for the cutout. So if I remember my next steps correctly, I'm going to actually copy this cylinder so that I have something with the exact correct dimensions to use for the second set of the cutout before I cut it into this piece. That way I don't have to recreate the whole thing and change all the settings and have to deal with all of that. Did I copy it? Yes, I did. Perfect. So I should make 2 copies because we're going to need the one with the hole. And I can take off the bevel and the segments because this does not need that. It's solely to use for the shape. Yep. So here we are. We're going to increase the dimensions of this one. This is going to cut out the base plate, remember? And then the smaller one, we're going to make 2 millimeters larger than the original one. That's going to give us a 2 millimeter wall. So here I am just preparing all of these pieces so that I can do all of my cuts at once. And if I have to undo anything, I still have these sort of base objects here to be able to help with that. Yeah, so we go an additional 2 millimeters on the diameter. Perfect. I'm going to triple check those dimensions by hovering over it again. And then we're going to start our cuts. So we're going to cut the main cylinder into the base plate now, which gets the inset ready to go. We're going to make our cut, and then we're going to examine that chamfer we have there in the cut. Honestly, it looks really good. I'm happy with how that turned out on that piece. I should have added more steps and segments from the beginning. Anyway, here we are. We're going to align these to check the dimensions. That is set to go. So now we just need the piece to cut the base plate. If I remember correctly, I think I just used a square this time. I realized that it didn't have to be a cylinder, and it would in fact be easier if it was a square, because then I could just use the same dimensions as the plate. And so here we are getting that square set up. We need it to be bigger than the base plate, but still aligned with the cylinder itself. This will be responsible for getting us that wall that will hold the jar in place. So right now, just making a cube that's big enough. It only needs to be as tall as the spot that we want to cut out of the base plate. And now, again, learning Tinkercad, I spent way too much time trying to align these things together. For some reason, these little dots were not all that intuitive. And especially this bottom one took me way longer than it needed to, when all I was trying to do was just making sure they were lined up. I don't know if I didn't see it or couldn't find it or didn't know what dot corresponded to which object. No clue. But I did figure it out, and it did get all sorted, and we got to move on from here. So now we're going to cut the cylinder out of this rectangle, and that will give us the wall shape we need. You can see the thickness of the wall against the main part. And now we can cut this part out of the base plate. That'll leave us with the wall for the jar and all of the dimensions we want. So the last thing we have to do is to make our cross shape and cut out more of this wall for the filament that we don't need and the spaces that we don't need. I think I even went more on these this time to just cut that extra out. Really, these just sort of align the jars. They don't hold them all that much. They aren't providing any sort of significant strength. So again, we start with the rectangle, we get it in position, we copy it, we rotate it 90 degrees, we merge that with the other piece, and then we cut it out of the base plate, which will give us those sections on that wall for the jar. We just remove material that we don't need. If my eye is right, that's about a quarter, maybe between a quarter of an eighth of the wall we're removing. It's really hard to tell. I was just a gut feeling on this. How much do we need to leave behind and how much could we cut out? So here we are with the final shape, the final part. You can see that extra chamfer really clearly there. Not too big of a base plate because we're trying to save on filament. And this looks great. I'm so happy with it. Let's print it and see how it responds in real life when we actually get the jar on it. Make sure it holds, make sure the chamfer fits, make sure we're happy with it. No problems printing this. Let's see how the jar fits in it. Yep, the wall is the same height as before, and it fits great, even though the chamfer isn't identical, which is fine. Anyway, this has been a blast. I'm going to do more of these. Thanks for sticking around, and hope you learned something.